we'll go after a little wild ginger today, and then there'll be a little bits and pieces of quite a few different things, but we'll probably just shoot for about 2 buckets of roots and herbs and different things like that. A lot of our beers are basically made with what is already harvested, or it's harvested for other reasons. So like this tree here, let's say, probably we'll cut this branch off and then we will brew with this. We've brewed like, you get some tannins, it's a hickory tree.
Okay.
So like that branch will get cut off for a multiple of reasons, but we'll just try to use it in beer so it's not wasted.
So literally that branch?
Yeah, so we'll put the leaves in a beer, and then probably the sticks and stuff will get burnt in the oven. My grandma had a garden, and my mom and dad always had a big garden, and I would always have my little small garden next to theirs when I was a kid. And probably the earliest stuff was through like wildflowers, and gathering wildflowers from different places and then bringing them back and planting them in a garden or in a flower bed. So that was probably the earliest. And then when I was about 12, I started digging. There's a few medicinal herbs you can dig and sell for money, so I would dig ginseng and golden seal, and that's how I would make money in the summers. And then just being in the woods all the time as a little kid, every time you go out, if you learn 1 or 2 plants, and I'd all carry ID books with me, and there was always somebody around that knew a plant that I didn't know that would show me what it is. And once I was shown a plant, I would remember it. So last year I think we did 130 to 140 beers. So by doing so many, we're able to use so many different plants that our impact isn't that great.
The heart of our brewery is brewing with ingredients that we get locally, whether it's in the woods, literally surrounding our property, or in our garden. We all enjoy Belgian-style beers where, you can't necessarily pick out everything that's in there. When they do add things other than just barley, hops, water, and yeast, right. I feel really strongly that that's a good way of making beer.
I guess the hardest part is getting the flavor from that plant when it's at its freshest. When you pick it from the woods, getting that to come through. So this plant here is shiso, or it's a type of shiso. It's like a perilla is the actual name, but it's like an invasive as well, and it grows everywhere. We still haven't found like the best use for it, but we're working towards something. Generally, if you find a plant in a certain family and you find how it's been used a different way, those compounds in that plant family are generally the same. And by looking up those different leads, you'll find other historic uses for stuff that you didn't know. It's almost like a treasure hunt in that way. So all these roots beers and the forest beers we make and all those herbs, our goal is to make it taste like what you smell right now.
You brew a lot over a fire. How did you decide to do that? I mean, picking stuff out of the woods wasn't obscure enough. You had to also build a fire. Could you just talk about a little bit about your direct fire?
The first time was just purely an accident. We had all of our equipment and the building was done, but the propane wasn't in yet. So we had an old apple butter kettle, copper kettle, from an auctioneer let us borrow it. The very first one that we did was a bière de garde, and I loved it. I still think it was one of my favorite beers that we've done. Just that extra little kettle caramelization that you get with the direct wood fire is so different from propane or steam or anything like that.
There's a big pile of stones on a pallet jack right over there.
Mm-hmm.
you use rocks to brew as well. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the palette of rock is granite, and so we use that for a really old style of beer called Stein beer. And this would be before the advent of vessels that you could heat from underneath. So you'd be boiling in a wooden vessel.
Right, you
know.
can't put that on a fire.
No,
Right.
yeah, that would not end well. So
The beer would kind of go everywhere.
yeah.
Yeah.
So you put the rocks into the fire to heat them up. And so you can kind of see them through their process and stages of heating. They'll, at first be kind of, covered with soot and black, and then it'll kind of turn white, and then they'll be almost kind of glowing that dull cherry red. So you get them really, really hot.
I mean, we're talking about pieces of granite like this big.
Yeah, it's kind of dangerous, and you have to time it pretty carefully. The full-on boil comes very, very quickly, so you have to watch it and kind of stage when you add the rocks.
Okay.
Otherwise, you can get a massive boil over very quickly and
Okay.
lose half of your wort.
And
Wow.
it'll be boiling in 15 minutes, adding those granite rocks. They're so
That's
hot.
amazing.
Yeah.
And what does that impart to the beer?
Really intense caramelization flavors.
Okay.
But they're slightly different with the rocks, though. Sometimes you can get a little bit of smoke from the rocks being in the fire. Sometimes a little bit
okay.
of a marshmallowy character.
Yeah, or even like a burnt caramel or something like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is going to impart some tannic flavor to our to the beer. I believe it's like a multiflora rose, and so this part of the root right here, it makes like one of the best black teas that there is. Yeah. And we try not to take any more than we need. And this plant here, it sends out runners and rhizomes. So whatever I didn't get out of there, it's just going to grow a new plant. So we didn't even kill the plant really. We just took apart. It's not going to hurt the tree at all. I mean, I'm sure it can't feel good. This is a wild blackberry here. We'll use the entire plant, so we're not just going to dig up a plant for its root. We'll use its leaves at a different time or a different process in the boil, because we're looking for every flavor that plant could contribute. So the blackberry sour beer we had in there, I don't know if you got to try that. That one was bittered with the root of the blackberry. So you can cut up sections of the blackberry, and you could use sections of the rose too, but it has a much greener taste.
And I mean, obviously you go for the fruit if it's there, but
Yeah, but like in the wintertime, we can come out and see the stalks and know what the plant is, so we can harvest by what the plant looks like year round, even if everything's underground. As for the seasonality of our things too, if our seasonal beers, I guess, every beer I guess would be seasonal, but that'll probably work. If we're brewing a beer with pumpkin, let's say, that beer will probably be ready 2 months after the pumpkins have been ripe. So if we do, we'll do a squash beer probably, but it won't be ready until November or December. Those, if you think about those raspberry beers and things like that, they're right at the time that the raspberry is ripe. They've got to be using a puree or something from a previous year, which be just the opposite of, I mean, it would be like the longest something would store, I would assume. Although from a perspective, it would probably be the cheapest to buy then, because they're trying to get rid of that year's for the next.
you have used fermented acorns in the past as well for beers, and you have a whole line of beers called the Single Tree series. Can you tell me about what that is, the history of it?
Yeah, we kind of like took off on the hickory thing and did a beer that was just with hickory, parts of the hickory tree. So it was bittered with the hickory leaves. We used the hickory bark. I think we used some of the branches too. No hops. And that one went sour
Okay.
naturally. But it was a very clean sour.
Okay.
Very,
Nice
very
and
much just
lactic, yeah.
lactobacillus, yeah. But it had this toasted hickory bark in it too, which has this kind of marshmallow, incense, woodiness to it.
Mm-hmm.
And the combination was really interesting, very different
Mm-hmm.
from anything that we'd had before. And I think that kind of, we kind of just got started down the path of what would a bunch of beers be like if we were just kind of playing around with a single tree.
Mm-hmm.
So here's a hickory one, which naturally went sour. We didn't put hops in it. And as we're getting into the winter, we're thinking about making beers with maple sap and birch sap, since the sap starts flowing kind of like late February-ish.
Okay.
And so with those beers, we replaced the water entirely with the sap when the sap was flowing. So,
Wow.
you can't do that with every tree, but that's what makes these trees distinctive.
Okay.
So yeah, we had a single maple beer that we used the sap and the branches and the bark. There weren't any leaves on the tree when we were harvesting the sap then,
Mhm.
so we couldn't use leaves at that point. But and then we did a birch one, and then cedar, which we use a lot of cedar in general, and that one, but we don't often use the bark.
Mhm.
And we toasted the berries in to different degrees too, and got different flavors out of the berries just by toasting them at different levels and stuff, and then put that into that single beer.
Seems like every plant that you can find in the tropics, there's a plant that has a similar flavor here. And we can add all these ingredients to our beer, but yet it's still drinkable. Nothing's over the top. And we don't add these ingredients to make our beer weird, but to add a component of the land to our beers. I feel like a lot of times places are adding ingredients just to make their beer different, more so than how the ingredient responds to the actual beer. One reason I like this area so much is because people just don't know that it's really here. And while the beauty's not gonna slap you in the face like mountains would, it's really subtle here, and I don't know. I like things that are quiet or subtle, or it's that difference between a double IPA and a saison or something. I think a lot of times.